Welcome to a new Halloween night special, TikTakers. This time, we have prepared one full of creepypasta stories. We'll begin with one based on one of Trevor Henderson's creatures, the Bus Woman. It was an ordinary night with a lot of fog, and Valerie was walking to the bus stop. Her usual stop was under construction, so she had to walk a bit farther than usual to reach the new temporary stop. She didn't like that much, especially when she had to walk alone at night after work. While walking, she couldn't stop thinking about her latest dream. So to clear her mind, she decided to call Lou. When she told him where she was, her friend offered to pick her up by car, but she told him everything was fine, no need for that. She just needed someone to talk to while she made it to the bus stop. Lately, she had been having a lot of nightmares where she was on a bus. She decided to tell Lou about her dreams. Something that kept happening was that she was always late. Not that she could tell by the time on the clock, but somehow in the dream she just knew she was running very late. Whenever she tried to see the driver, she couldn't, as he was behind a foggy glass due to the cold, and the man couldn't hear her voice. The thought of not being able to see the driver, of being trapped on a journey without a destination, all of that filled her with despair. Lou told her that while it sounded stressful, it didn't seem like a particularly scary nightmare. However, Valerie knew there was something deeper in those dreams. There are nights when I don't even know when I got on the bus or where it's headed. Everything is wrapped in an eternal midnight and the streets are unfamiliar. Lou asked if there was anything else that disturbed her. Well, I usually go alone, but in my last dream, there was someone in the back seat. The lights were flickering, and although I never saw her, because I didn't dare to look directly behind me, I felt it was a woman. If I had looked at her, I'm sure something terrible would have happened. Lou became visibly anxious at that revelation, and in a whisper asked his friend how the nightmare ended. However, Valerie frowned, trying to remember, but the ending faded like the fog around her. As she continued walking, a scream broke the silence of the night. Valerie stopped, looking around. "Did you hear that?" she murmured in the phone.
"It could just be a drunk person. Are you sure you're alone on that street? I'd better come get you,"
her friend replied. Valerie felt torn between her pride and the fear that gripped her. "I'm fine, Lou. You don't need to come." Although deep down, she was dying for him to do so. Just as she was about to give in and ask Lou to pick her up, a bus stopped in front of her. Without thinking twice, she got on, leaving behind the feeling of danger. Once inside, the atmosphere felt familiar, but heavy and uncomfortable. She headed towards the back seats, and then she heard a creaking sound, like old wood. That didn't make any sense. Once inside, the memories of her nightmares came back with force. She tried to press the stop button, but the driver didn't stop.
"Val, are you okay?"
Lou asked her over the phone. However, the sound of glass breaking around her made her tremble. "Lou, there's something here. I feel it's behind me," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Lou asked her to take a picture of the space behind her, to see if it was just her imagination and nerves. With shaky hands, the young woman took a picture of the area behind her and sent it. But when she looked at the image, a chill ran down her spine. The creaking continued. Valerie, overwhelmed by anguish, pressed the stop button repeatedly. "Why isn't it stopping? Oh no, 14% battery. I think I'm going to die tonight." After seeing the photo on his phone that his friend had sent, suddenly a banging sound echoed in Lou's house. As terrified as Valerie, he grabbed a baseball bat and told her he was going to call the police, putting her on hold. The young woman, filled with panic, muttered that she just wanted to get out of there. She began to express regret for the decision to send the picture to her friend. After a while, a cut in the call sounded again. "Lou, are you there?" He confirmed that he hadn't been able to call the police. Every time he tried to make the call, a strange noise came on the line and it was cut off. Belle, desperate, ran towards the driver, banging on the glass. "Stop! Let me out! Can you hear me?" she shouted, but the man didn't respond. The figure behind her seemed to be getting closer, and the creaking grew louder. Suddenly, something hit the door of Lou's living room. His door creaked open, followed by a long silence. At that moment, a crash was heard both in Lou's house and on the bus. And the young man began to speak in an oddly monotone voice.
You were right, Valerie. You shouldn't have looked her in the face.
Valerie's heart stopped. The buzzwoman advanced quickly towards her. She screamed with all her might, but her cries were abruptly and disturbingly cut off. Lou hung up the call and everything stopped. The night swallowed her screams, and the bus, in silence, continued its journey to an unknown destination. What did you think of this creature? We have to confess, the thought of taking a bus at night has terrified us. Although we're not so sure about cars either, and if not, just remember this is a story with us. Another of Trevor Henderson's creatures, Long Horse. It was the middle of the night, and I was driving my car through a poorly lit country road. My wife was sitting in the front seat, and my 2 children were in the back. We were driving back home after visiting my in-laws in their country house. We should have left earlier, and the children should have been in bed by now, but time just flew by. In fact, I was the only one awake, and everyone else was sleeping in their seats. I also started to feel sleepy, so I tried to focus. I could not get distracted. That was a dangerous road with some really sharp turns after all. And to make matters worse, a storm was starting to break out and the wind started to shake the tree branches. I could only think about finally getting home and resting in my bed. I thought about putting some music on or roll down the window to wake myself up, but that would wake up the others, so I tried to just focus on the road. But I couldn't help it. My eyelids felt heavy and my eyes were closing. I thought that nothing bad would happen if I rested my eyes for just an instant. There were barely any other cars on the road, and it was unlikely an animal would cross at this hour. My hands were driving automatically, my mind started to get foggy, and I entered a semi-conscious state. I have no idea if what happened next was real or a product of my imagination. When I made a turn on the next curve, I could distinguish in the darkness a strange figure by the side of the road. Some sort of animal, but not a normal one. At first I thought it was a skeleton of a horse, since I could distinguish a horse's skull in that figure. However, I realized the skull had a long and thin neck coming out of it, like a snake, which seemed to have no end. Suddenly, the creature raised its head and looked directly at me. The shock scared me so much that I lost control of the car, getting off-road and hitting a tree. I then woke up in a shock and realized I was just dreaming. I fully regained consciousness, seeing I was still driving my car and my family was still asleep. Fortunately, the shock kept me awake, but I couldn't stop thinking about the meaning of that vision and of such a strange and creepy creature. Then I heard the voice of my youngest son behind me. He insisted that we left the road and went back to Grandpa and Grandma's house. I told him we couldn't go back since we would be arriving to the city pretty soon, but he kept insisting, saying that we had to go back or something terrible would happen to us, and that a long horse just told him so. Surprised by such a coincidence with my dream, I asked him where the long horse was, and he pointed to one side of the road. And there it was again, with its sinister skull without a jaw and its infinite neck producing chilling crackles. I immediately stepped on the brake, turned the car around, and drove back to my in-laws' house. Through the rearview mirror, I could see how that unnerving creature was looking directly at us. My wife woke up and, alarmed, asked me why we were turning back. Covered in a cold sweat, I didn't even know how to respond. And I just said that the weather was terrible and the road was very dangerous right now, so it was best for us to go back and spend the night at her parents' house. She thought that was strange, but when she saw how scared I was, she just complied. The next morning, my youngest son and I were eating breakfast in silence, still in shock by what had happened the night before. On TV, a news story broke out saying that there was an accident in the same road we were driving on. A tree fell due to the bad weather, blocking the way, and a driver who had no time to react crashed with it. Everyone in the car died. My son and I looked at each other, horrified, when we realized how close we were to a certain death. Longhorse is another one of the creatures out of the mind of the artist Trevor Henderson, creator of Siren Head and Cartoon Cat. Its head is a horse skull without a jaw, which is connected to a long and pale neck with some strands of black mane. Longhorse's neck is completely flexible, it's infinitely large and produces crackles when it contorts and moves in every way imaginable. Curiously, it is said that it also exudes a smell of cinnamon and that it enjoys offerings such as apples and small pets. It first appeared in August 24, 2018 when Trevor published an unnerving image of it in his social media accounts. Along with the description, "I had that dream again about the horse on the stairs." Shortly after, he uploaded another image, this time in the suburbs of a city, with the following text. "Every night, it curved into his dreams, folded into view from around impossible corners. One gaping socket always on him as it silently glided. He thought putting some distance between the thing he'd found in the attic and himself might help, but no, it met him on the road." A third time appeared a later time. An ancient cave painting which suggested that Longhorse could have existed since ancient times, and that despite its creepy appearance, it could be a being who protects humans, who warns them about any danger or disaster that could be getting close to so they can avoid it. Thus, Longhorse has the power to predict the future and can also teleport to whatever it wants. Its infinite neck is capable of bending the laws of physics, defy gravity, and contort to unthinkable extremes. Trevor himself mentioned one time that if you look directly at Longhorse's neck for a while, the neck will wither and fade to dust, but Longhorse will not be affected. This is the only creature created by Trevor Henderson which isn't evil and doesn't try to harm others. Which is why many speculate that Siren Head and Longhorse are arch enemies, due to their diametrically opposed ways of looking at humanity. Despite this, we bet most of you wouldn't like to ever encounter this bad omen of a creature, would you?
We're back. Wow, we got goosebumps remembering this creepy one. How about a little chess? Let's remember the creepypasta, the chess master.
My name is William Dwight, but I like to be referred to as the chess master. Ever since I can remember, I've been an excellent strategist. I practically learned to speak and play chess at the same time. I started taking chess classes when I was 7 years old, and I still remember my first professional match. I won, of course, and that's a feeling I've been experiencing my entire life. I'm a true master of the game, nobody can defeat me. It could be that my obsession with chess led me to not be very sociable. I never had many friends, well, except for one, Garrett. I met him at a chess tournament, and soon enough our passion for the game made us inseparable friends. He was even more withdrawn and reserved than me, and that's why his change of attitude really surprised me. With time, he became more of an extrovert, and his interest in chess faded away. Sometimes we would get mad at each other, but everything would go back to normal afterwards. I understood that we had chosen different paths, but that we were still friends despite that, or so I thought. One day I approached him and asked if he would like to play chess with me, for old time's sake. In that moment, Garrett was talking to a girl, and I noticed how both of them gave me a weird look. Garrett didn't even respond. So I grabbed my books and left.
"Hey guys, there goes the great William Dwight,"
I heard behind my back. And that's when I knew our friendship was over. I ran home under the rain, broken inside. I got in and shut myself in my room, slamming the door. Shortly after, my father knocked on my door, but he was the last person I wanted to see, and I didn't bother to answer him. My mother had died in a traffic accident 5 years ago, and I was still not over it. My father worked hard to be both a father and a mother, but deep inside, I wished he had been the one to die. Time passed, and Garrett didn't show any sign of wanting to sort things out with me. Many times I waited for him outside the library only to see him ignore me and go away laughing with his new friends. The only thing that kept my mind occupied was chess, learning new moves and improving each day. At least I still had that. One day my phone rang. It was Garrett.
Well, I'm sorry about what happened. You know that for a while I've wanted to have a more normal life, make new friends and forget chess a bit. I hope you can understand me. I'm sorry about what I did, but I promise you it will not happen again.
Could it be that he was actually sorry? Would I get my friend back? The only person who had been by my side for so many years?
I want to talk things out. Please come see me at the park at 8. I want to apologize to you in person.
I couldn't hide my relief nor my desire to sort things out with him. Thus, at 8 o'clock, I was already at the park. I saw Garrett sitting on a swing. He waved at me and I approached him, but my expression changed once I saw he was with other 6 students.
He doesn't know?
Asked one of them. What a fool I'd been. Of course it was all a farce and all they wanted to do was laugh at me. I turned around, but before I could take a single step, they tackled me down and I received a shower of kicks and punches. My body was numb because of the pain and I could hardly open my eyes. They finally left once they got tired of beating me up, except Garrett, who got closer to whisper in my ear.
Did you really think we were friends?
Like I would ever be friends with someone like you lunatic nutcase. His laugh was the last thing I heard before passing out. Will, wake up! I opened my eyes, but everything was dark. Was I dead? You aren't dead, Will. I couldn't see who was talking, but for some reason I wasn't scared. Who are you? I asked. That doesn't matter, does it, Will? Just like friends don't matter. But you're not alone. You still have chess. Whoever was talking was right. For many years, I worked hard to be a good friend just to end up having Garrett betray me. In contrast, chess would always be there for me. What do you want from me? I asked. You will know soon enough. For now, just focus on winning this game. A light surrounded me. I felt a mysterious energy different to anything I've ever felt before. It was like some sort of force took over me, while the only thing I could see was a background with black and white squares. My father's body fell heavily to the ground with a stab in his chest from which blood was spurting out. I stopped to enjoy the feeling of holding the sword in my hand. He was my first victim, and I managed to kill him with a single stab. I expected no less from me. I sheathed my sword and got out of the house. And that was a wonderful night, filled with death and blood. I couldn't help but feel excited for what was about to come. My appearance had changed due to the power I had received from that entity, and I looked even more perfect. The appearance of a master player. I couldn't help but laugh at people, at their ignorance, at their conformism. They didn't even realize. The world was a chessboard, and I was tired of always being a meek pawn. I didn't even want to be a different piece, as my destiny was being the player. The one who moves all of the pieces at his will. The master. And for that, I needed to win that game. Garrett's house was just a short walk from here. I think I'll pay him a visit. And until then, checkmate. Now we continue with a girl, Alice, a sweet young woman who used to give her imaginary friends number names. You know who we're talking about, right? Alice was a young girl with green eyes and candy-colored hair. She was sweet and intelligent, but very shy and never had any friends. That's why she often created her own imaginary friends that she named with a number to differentiate them. There was one in particular that stood out, her first imaginary friend, Zero. For Alice, life was sad until Zero arrived. She was her best friend and always protected her. Zero wore a black sweater, black and white striped gloves and socks, and brown boots. Around her eyes were black circles. Alice would spend all her time with her, and when her parents saw her playing and talking to herself, They got worried and thought about seeking help. One summer day, Alice sat down to sunbathe in her garden. The sun caressed her pale skin. As she sat on the grass, she felt a strange sensation. Something in the depths of her mind urged her to cross to the other side of the street. Barefoot, she headed towards the road. As she looked up, she saw a large white truck coming towards her and she was paralyzed, in shock. There was a loud, squeaking sound as the vehicle turned in another direction, dodging her and falling down the hill until it caught fire. Alice froze pale. She watched as someone crawled desperately out of the vehicle, covered in crimson blood. It was her father, and next to him was her mother, screaming as they burned to death. "Mom! Dad!" she cried out. It was the last time she saw them. After the accident, she was adopted by her neighbor, Mrs. Rogers. She was an alcohol addict. Alice hated her very much, but she had no one else, no family, no friends. As she grew older, she forgot her imaginary friends. One day in class, Alice was absorbed drawing in her notebook when the teacher caught her attention. "Alice, I suggest you pay attention in my classes. I don't think you need another 0. She was confused. Something the teacher had just said bothered her, but she didn't know what. She felt sick, so she asked for permission to go to the bathroom and rest out. When she arrived, she washed her face with cold water, and when she looked up to her reflection, she panicked. She swore she saw someone else. She went back to class and saw how strange red circles were drawn in her notebook. A chill ran through her body. As she left class, she found her only friend, Anne, who had short blonde hair and brown eyes. "Hello, Alice. Welcome to Wonderland," said Anne. "I'm not in the mood today, Anne," she replied seriously. "Come on, cheer up. You have me here for anything." When she arrived home, she went up to her room trying not to make any noise. As she passed through the living room, she held her breath. "Here you are, bloody girl," shouted Mrs. Rogers, grabbing her arm. Her breath stunk. Alice screamed. "What is this, huh?" she said, pushing her towards the kitchen where it was all full of beer cans and boxes of pre-cooked food. I'm sorry. I didn't have time to clean up. I was late for school." "I don't need excuses. Don't let it happen again or you'll regret it, I swear." She threw her on the floor and she hit her head with the floor tiles. Alice picked everything up containing her sadness, anger, and confusion. The next day, she took another route to school so no one would see her. She walked through the snowy forest in her black sweatshirt, covering the bruise on her face. Just as she got to school, something made her fall. She felt a group of boys laughing at her, her blood boiling with rage more and more intensely. She got up and pushed the boy. She threw him to the ground and started hitting his face non-stop. "Alice, stop!" she heard screaming. "What's wrong with you? We only want to help you." She looked up and saw everyone's horrified expression, including that of her friend Anne. She looked at her bloody knuckles and the boy's smashed face. "What have I done? I didn't mean to," she thought. Tears filled her eyes. She stood up and fled into the woods. When she got home, she blindfolded her wounds in the bathroom and saw her reflection in the mirror. "What did I just do? I didn't want to." "Oh no, of course not. It was me. I just wanted to protect you," answered the voice, using her own mouth. Alice stepped away, surprised. It was unbelievable, but her reflection had just spoken for her. Who are you?" she asked, stuttering. "I'm your best friend, remember?" Her head started spinning as she fell to the ground feebly. The voice was inside her head, repeating the same phrase over and over again. "I'm your best friend, your only friend, 0. In the following weeks, the voices stopped. But Alice began to become a different person, more and more irritable and violent. She often suffered sudden attacks and laughed like a mad woman. She felt as if her mind was someone else's. When Mrs. Rogers found out that she had been expelled from school, she got angry and locked her in her room. She sobbed, felt weaker and weaker until one night she fainted. When she woke up, she was on the floor. Her whole body hurt. There was no sign of Mrs. Rogers. Relieved, she left her room and went to the living room. She was surprised by news that appeared on television where they said they had found a decapitated woman. She decided to make herself a soup for dinner. A rotten smell struck her. A hammer covered with blood was lying on the floor. Scared, she returned to her room. As she entered, she saw the walls covered with circles drawn in blood. And on her bed laid Mrs. Rogers' lifeless head. She ran out of the room in horror, but tripped and fell down the stairs until she reached the floor unconscious. She woke up again in a room full of mirrors that reflected her pale face with tired eyes. "Aren't you happy? It's gone. She won't bother you anymore," said the same spooky voice. She turned around, but no one else was there. "What are you? A demon? I want answers." "Don't you remember me, Alice? I'm your best friend. I'm Zero. We're best friends forever. I had to find a way to protect you. I'm part of your conscience, so I'm you," whispered the voice. "That's not possible. I had to kill your parents. They wanted to separate us, but you still abandoned me. Now I'm getting stronger," said the sinister voice. An uncontrollable rage seized Alice. With her fists, she punched the mirrors. She didn't feel any pain. She didn't feel anything at all. "You took everything from me. I have no one because of you." She broke the last mirror and closed her eyes, blinded by a white glow. When she opened them again, she went to the bathroom to look at herself. Both her skin and her hair were completely white. Black circles surrounded her eyes. She began to laugh out loud. Alice was gone and Zero was free. "I almost look like a skeleton, only missing the teeth," said Zero. She grabbed sharp scissors and cut out her cheeks in a grin from ear to ear. Blood flowed from the wounds. She took a needle and sewed the flesh. Zero hated the red color, so she stuck her index finger in bleach and pointed at her eyes. When she regained her vision, all the colors had been dyed faded gray, dark black, and blinding white. The telephone rang and Zero answered, imitating Alice's voice. It was Anne, who invited her to her house because she had a gift for her. She picked up her hammer and went out the door impatiently with a psychopathic smile on her face. When Anne opened the door for her, she was shocked. Alice was now a white monster. Scared, she tried to run, but Zero grabbed her arm and threw her to the ground. "Alice, what are you doing?" shouted Anne in despair. "Alice is not coming back. She was a pipsqueak." She laughed out loud. She lifted the heavy hammer and smashed it against her head. With the knife, she tore the skin to remove the bones. One by one, she deposited them on the ground next to the corpse, shaping a skeleton. Only the skull was missing, but it was shattered, so she plunged her hand into the pool of blood and painted a circle where the head should be. Next to the body was a box with a label that read, "For Alice." She removed the cover, took the black and white stripped scarf from inside, and wore it. "Whoa, thank you, Anne. That was fun. Now that you're gone, we will finally be Zero," said the murderer as she walked out the door and stepped into the darkness of the forest. Zero is a classic we never get tired of watching over and over again. It's so exciting. Now we continue with clues about the next creepy. Who are the protagonists? Tom and Helen. And the smiley face emoji plays a big role. Do you have it already? Bro! This is Helen, a 14-year-old boy. He has dark circles under his eyes that make him look like he never slept. He doesn't care much about his messy black hair. He doesn't spend time getting ready. He sits at the end of the class by the window. He's always drawing. It is his only passion. He is a lonely person who doesn't like to socialize. This is Tom. They're dragging him down the hall again. Tom is always being picked on, and it isn't because he's ever done anything. It's just because people have that habit. The situation repeats itself often, and Helen, like all his other colleagues, knows it. Even though he feels bad for Tom, he doesn't want to interfere because it would make him a nuisance. This is Judy, the most popular girl in class. She has lost her watch and is looking for it. Where's my watch? Has anyone seen it? Helen is ignoring her, not interested. Suddenly, someone sees something that shines in Helen's backpack. What is this? Ben said as he reached into his backpack and pulled out a watch adorned with rhinestones. Helen is very surprised. How the hell did the watch get in his backpack? Oh, that's my watch, Judy says as she looks at Helen with a strange look. It wasn't me, Helen says, continuing to draw without lifting his head. Yeah, sure, Judy says, storming out of class with Ben. The next day, as always, Helen is at his table drawing. There is a strange atmosphere. People whisper things about him. The word thief sounds in the air. He decided not to say anything because no one would believe him. Days go by and Helen continues to be the focus of the class. One morning, Ben picks up his sketchbook. Always doing these nonsense things, Ben says as he grabs a few pages and tears them to shreds. At that time, Helen is transforming. His drawings are the most precious to him. He gets up and punches Ben out of his hands. Helen isn't strong, so he takes a good beating. His face is all battered. Nobody does anything. When the teacher arrives, everyone is sitting in their place. But Helen, Otis, what happened to you? It was nothing, I fell down the stairs, says Helen. At home, he repeats that he has fallen from the stairs. His parents think that he is a normal boy who loves to draw and with lots of friends. The bullying at school continues through the weeks. Helen doesn't think a bloody mix-up with a watch would lead to this situation. Who blamed him in the first place? Hi, are you there? Helen has just received a message from an unknown user on Facebook. Who are you? I'm Tom, your classmate. Tom had never talked to him before, so he's surprised. What's going on? Helen wrote. Are you alright? You don't care. I know you don't feel well. You're in the same situation as me. I really want to help you, but I don't know what to do. I'm sorry. After that, Tom and Helen continue to talk. Helen likes to have someone to share his things with. He even jokes around using the smiley face emoji. It's the first time Helen has a friend. Come meet me on the roof after the first hour is over. We need to talk. Don't ask. Following his instructions, Helen goes with Tom to the roof. Hey Tom, what's happening? I have to tell you something important. Do you remember the incident of the stolen watch? How was he going to forget? That was the beginning of his suffering. Helen nods. I was the culprit. Tom looks down. What? Helen was surprised. I stole Judy's watch and I blamed you. Why did you do that? I wanted to create a new victim. My life is much better now that everyone bothers you. Tom smiled. Helen can't believe what's happening, grabs Tom by the collar of his shirt and gives him a little push, causing him to end up near the edge. Tom slips and falls tragically. Helen tries to help him, but he doesn't have the strength. So sorry. The police arrive. They're questioning Helen. He's in shock and can barely speak. Everyone thinks that Tom killed himself. After all, he's a sad boy that everyone messed with. Helen is crying in his room. He feels guilty. Suddenly, a thought crossed his mind. It's not my fault Tom died. He deserved to die. This makes him feel so much better. Helen smiles creepily. Tom has had his punishment. I guess it's about time the others had theirs, huh? His crying turns into a smile covered by darkness and a thirst for revenge. It's Halloween and there is a party the next day. Of course, Helen is not invited. Judy and Maggie, the second most popular girl in the class, live together in a residence and are preparing the costumes for the party, each in their room while chatting. Who's coming to the party? I'm so excited. Most of her class will be there. I sent many messages to Ben and they came out as read, but he never answers me. What will happen to him? Oh, he's probably busy. Something weird is going on. I'm hearing strange footsteps towards my door. I think someone's loitering. Do you want me to go there? Using the peephole in the door, Maggie sees something unusual. Oh my gosh, there is a guy outside with a mask and a blue jacket. He has a knife and it's stained with blood. No, it's pounding on my door. Oh god, oh god, oh god, take it easy and find a weapon or something. Protect yourself. I'm scared. What should I do? Maggie, save me. Maggie, calm down. Maggie, are you there? Maggie? The message has been read, but Judy doesn't see Maggie's response. Suddenly, Judy hears the sound of her door opening. She turns around and screams in fright. A person with blood on his mask and a blue jacket breaks into her room and stabs her. That night, all the students invited to the party were killed. Nobody knows what happened. The killer used the blood of the victims to paint the smiley face emoticon on the walls. Many of the corpses were mutilated and ground up, possibly to get more pigments. Helen Otis, the culprit, is still missing. However, in the chat where Judy and Maggie were talking, a message was left after Judy's death. Don't be excited about tomorrow, because there will be no tomorrow. Not all creepypastas have a man or a woman as a protagonist, and that doesn't make them any less terrifying. Stay with us as we remember Smile Dog. The first time I met Mary in person was in the summer of 2007. Her husband Terrence set the date up. In the beginning, Mary agreed. I was just an experienced writer searching for ideas for a novel. When I got to their house, I couldn't see Mary. She had locked herself up in her room. Terrence and I stood in front of the room's door. She talked and I took notes. Even though I couldn't see her, I knew she was crying. Mary talked without making any sense about her horrible nightmares. I decided to leave. I didn't want to bother her. Her story was very tough. In 1992, she was working as a software developer for an important company. That was the year she found the image smile.jpg and her life changed forever. Mary was one of the 400 people that saw the picture, but she was the only one who talked openly about the experience. After the event, she could barely leave her house and she had to quit her job. It was in 2005 that I found out about the existence of this picture through internet forums that talked about paranormal cases. Lots of people knew Smile.dog existed, the creature that supposedly appeared in the Smile.jpg picture. Mary was the most mentioned victim in all conversations. The other people affected have remained anonymous. Or maybe they disappeared. Actually, there was no credible information. All the phenomenon was focused on a picture that can't be found anywhere. Though there were many imitations and fake copies around in forums and through chain emails. Witnesses stated that once you see it, you suffer immediately a sudden epilepsy attack and a severe anxiety. All the supposed victims gave the same description of the picture, a creature that looked like a husky in a dark room lit only by the flash of the camera. The only detail they could see clearly in the background is a human hand. The hand isn't holding anything, but it seems alive. The dog has shiny eyes and a big gloomy smile, showing 2 rows of teeth, very white, very straight, very perfect. When you see it, you suffer an epileptic attack and you never forget it. The dog comes to the dreams of the victims that have seen the original picture until their final days. After the failed interview with Mary, I decided to keep researching, but everything led me to a dead-end street. A year after, I received an email from Mary that got me totally by surprise. I'm sorry about my behavior last summer. See, I've had nightmares about a Smile.dog every night for 15 years. I know this might sound absurd, but it is the truth. In my dream, I can't move. I can't talk. I only look in front of me, and the only thing I see is that scene in the picture. I see that hand, and I see that dog. He tells me something. He tells me I have to share his word, show his picture. I didn't understand it. Where was I to get it from? Soon after, I got a floppy disk in a mysterious package. I didn't need to see what was inside. I already knew. I considered my options carefully. Who should I show it to? If that Smile.dog was faithful to his word, I would sleep peacefully again. But at what price? What would the consequences be for those people that saw it? I decided not to do anything. For 15 years, I hid the floppy disk. All these years, Smile.dog invaded my dreams. I ignored it. I ignored his request, and it's been a torture. When we set up the interview, I thought about giving you the floppy disk. I didn't know you, and you were so desperate to know more about Smile.dog. But I saw you arrive through the window, and I couldn't. I locked myself up in my room. I don't want anyone to suffer as I'm suffering. Please stop your research before it's too late. Sincerely, Mary. Mary died not long after I received that email. I talked to Terrence, her husband, and he told me he had burned the floppy disk. He said that while it was melting, it sounded as if it was growling, as an animal. I have to admit, I wasn't very sure how to react to all this. In the beginning, I thought it could be a practical joke, but just in case, I decided to stop my research. Soon after, I received another email. Hi, I found your emails in forums about the Smile Dog. I saw it, and it's not as bad as people say. Here's a copy. Spread the word. I was paralyzed. I felt I was going to pass out. The email came with a document attached, of course, named smile.jpg. I thought about downloading it. It was probably a fake picture. And even if it was true, how was it even possible that a simple picture could cause a curse? I really wanted to see it. I'd been searching for it for so long. If I saw it, I would know how to get rid of the dog. I thought that if I made a video about Smile.dog, I could use the picture as evidence. Anybody who saw the video could see the forbidden picture. But assuming the picture is authentic, was I really gonna risk all those lives only to save myself? Could I do such a thing? Yes, I could. We now continue with one of the most vengeful creepypastas on the internet. Still don't know which one it is? How dare you challenge an angel? Now I will announce that you are guilty.
Today is an important day for the Clark family. After 9 months, Mrs. Clark is finally going to give birth to her daughter. Everyone knows Mr. Clark. He's the most famous judge in the region. After a few hours, the nurse who is delivering the baby comes out to the waiting room and talks to Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark? Yes? What's happening? You may have to see for yourself. What is happening? Well, your daughter seems to be a bit... The nurse begins to explain, taking slow steps back with notable fear towards the man in front of her. Special, she finally says. Mr. Clark began to run towards the room where his wife was. The newborn is a girl with blonde hair like the sun. Mrs. Clark had red hair, while Mr. Clark's was brown. The most surprising thing is that the baby had a pair of terrifying eyes. Her eyes were completely black, with a small singular shine. What is wrong with this girl? Mr. Clark yelled furiously at his wife. Are you sure she's mine? I'm going to request a DNA test. When the results came out, it was confirmed that she was his daughter. The girl grew normally. Her eyes were completely dark, but they didn't show any vision problem. On the contrary, her eyesight seemed better than that of a normal person. Mr. Clark doesn't understand what was happening with his daughter. He always dreamed of the perfect girl. He wasn't willing for anyone to see that monster. He selfishly decided to raise her at home. Mrs. Clark, who depended on the judge for everything, had no choice but to accept. Years later, Dina Angela, the girl with extraordinary eyes, has just turned 13. She's a shy and quiet young lady who doesn't know how to relate. Dina knows that her father is a very famous judge, and the fairest. He always looks for perfection in everything, and Dina is not. With her mother, however, everything was different. Dina is Mom's spoiled girl. She hardly goes outside the precinct of the family mansion. She has short, messy blonde hair, but her mother always brushes it when her father's around. Contrary to him, Dina loves her eyes. They fascinate her. She doesn't have any friends. She used to dream that she was playing with the children in the park, that she could see from her room in the distance. Someone knocks on the door. It's Mom. Dina, I'm going to the mall. Do you want me to get something for you? No, thanks. But daughter, you haven't been eating anything, and you seem so sad. I'm going to bring you something special. Her mother was always spoiling her behind the scenes of her father. Dina really wants to try everything on the outside, but she knows she can't. The perfect Mr. Clark wouldn't let people know that his daughter is a monster. Misha, her twisted nanny who accompanies her since she was born, watches over her at all hours, every step, every sigh. Dina loves visiting her father's library. Although he doesn't like it, she always manages to slip away to enter. The pure white-colored sword placed in a glass case in the middle of the room is her favorite item. Dina can stand for hours looking at it. According to his mother, there was a legend that the sword originally belonged to a righteous angel, and during a war the sword accidentally fell into the human world and was never found by the angel again. However, since then, different humans in the world began to use it. It is believed that only destined people can handle it. Dina touches the glass case and could almost feel as if she was holding the sword. Suddenly, she heard footsteps approaching. She hid. The door opens. It's Misha. She was looking for her. Her mother has just returned, loaded with bags. Mr. Clark meets her at the front door. "What did you buy?" He grabs Mrs. Clark's arm when he asks, her bags falling to the floor in shock. "Is this for her? I've told you 1,000 times to stop pampering her." Mr. Clark swings his wife's arm. She's very nervous and almost falls. Dina runs to help her mother. "Enough!" Mr. Clark releases her and leaves. "Mom, are you okay?" "Don't worry, I'm fine. I'm very clumsy today." The truth is that Mrs. Clark can't leave her husband. She loves Dina too much, and she would lose custody if they divorced. Dina walks her mother into the room and lies down on her lap. "Mom, do you hate me?" "My eyes." "Of course not. You're my angel after all." "Angel." Dina suddenly remembers the sword in the collection room. "Mom, do you want to escape?" Her mother nods. "Let's run away together." They prepare the plan to escape a week later on Christmas Eve. Dina has prepared everything. They just have to wait until nightfall to run away. She's sitting in her room looking out the window. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door. It's Mrs. Clark. "Run, Dina. Your father knows." Before Dina can react, Mr. Clark pushes Mrs. Clark away and walks in. "Damn monster, I'm gonna kill you. They've discovered you. The journalists keep calling. You've let yourself be seen, monster." Mr. Clark throws her aside. Her mother tries to save her. Dina hits her head and passes out. When Dina regains consciousness, she finds herself locked in the basement in a kind of cage. Misha walks in. "Hey, little monster, how does it feel to be there? I knew about your plans to escape, and that's why I sent your photos to the reporters. I hate you since you were born, and your father forced me to watch you in order to avoid being put in jail. I'm sick of this life." Dina was too angry. She felt as if something new came out of her. She grabs Misha's ankle, knocks her off her feet, and drags her with force. Misha yells. Dina stares at the woman. "What you have done cannot escape the eyes of an angel, so now I will announce that you are." Dina chokes Misha even harder and whispers in the woman's ear, "Guilty." Dina laughs hysterically, not believing what she just did, grabs the keys from the deceased Misha's pocket to open the cage, and heads upstairs to the library. She walks over to the crystal box, knocks it over and picks up the glowing sword from the ground. Dina goes to Mr. Clark's office. The time has come. Her father isn't inside, but there's her mother. She looks very bruised. Dina walks over to her mother and holds her. Her mother is no longer breathing. She wipes away her tears and leaves the room in search of her father. "Dad, Daddy, Daddy, where are you?" Mr. Clark is in the kitchen covering his injuries with an ice pack. "What are you doing here? How did you escape?" He's getting more and more nervous. "Monster, you're a monster. You shouldn't have been born. Stay away from me." "How dare you defy an angel, Father? Now I will announce that you are guilty." Dina stabs her father with her sword, ending his life. She no longer has anything left in that house. As she had planned, she runs away, never to return. The era of the righteous angel has just begun, so be careful what you do. You never know when you might become guilty.
Don't leave yet. The creepypasta evening continues. We move on with the puppeteer. I had that doll for a long time. I can't even remember when I got it as a present. It was a China doll with long and blonde curls, bright black eyes, and a red dress. I always had it on my desk, opposite the bed, smiling and ready to talk to me or simply watch me sleep. I will never forget this image, especially because it's one of the last things I saw before dying. My friends in college were nice people, but not very talkative. I would have liked to have more friends in college, but nobody wanted to get close to me. They'd only talk to me when they needed something. Luckily, I spent most of my time studying and doing homework, so I didn't have the time to think about how lonely I was. Also, my parents would kill me if they found out I was wasting my studies. No matter how hard it was, I had to stay and do my best to pass the year. With time, I started isolating myself more and more, and the paranoia started. I tried to find help, but nobody had time to listen to a student overwhelmed by exams. I spent hours and hours alone, locked in my room, not leaving it really. I even stopped going to class. However, nobody worried about me. For weeks, my room became my jail. I didn't need much, and if somebody knocked on the door, I'd yell at them and tell them to leave. They didn't insist the second time. And so weeks went by and it was only me and my doll. Until that night. After several days without leaving my room, the atmosphere had turned really weird, but the window was broken and I couldn't open it. So I finally decided to leave the room. I had lost track of time, but there was nobody in the hallways and it was dark outside, so I guessed it was late at night. I didn't really care anyway. I went out for a walk. I felt good in the silence of the night with nobody around bothering me. When I finally decided to go back to my room, in the darkness of the stairs, I found someone standing there. It bothered me. I didn't want to have to explain anything to anyone, so I just passed by him. He didn't even move, and I started to get scared. It might be some student trying to scare the freshmen, I thought. But then I heard that unnatural sound, like a hypnotizing and irritating buzz. I was paralyzed, couldn't move a muscle, even if I wanted to. My sight was slowly adapting to the darkness, and I could see what he looked like. He was dressed in black, from head to toes, with a jacket and a hat. His hair was very dirty, as if he hadn't washed it for a very long time. When he talked, his voice sounded like a static noise, like a broken radio. He only said a sentence. "You're alone here, aren't you?" It was enough to make my blood run cold. When he turned to me, I could see his chilling face. He didn't have any scar or deformation, but there was a strange sparkle in his eyes and in his mouth, a golden shining. I felt that light penetrate my body. It was then that I reacted and ran towards my room. I rushed inside and accidentally fell over the desk and threw my China doll. She fell on the floor and her beautiful face broke in 1,000 small pieces. Suddenly, all the noises around us stopped. There was a total silence. It was only myself and my loved broken doll. I tried to scream, desperate, but no sound came out of my mouth. I threw myself onto the floor, and alienated, I started to obsessively put together all the small pieces. I grabbed a bottle of glue and tried to fix as best as I could, but each time I tried to glue the pieces, they were destroyed in my hand again. I insisted and insisted. She was my only friend, and she was disappearing between my fingers. I was so exhausted, desperate, and afraid that I finally nestled in my bed under the sheets and let myself go. I didn't think he was coming back. This time, I was semi-conscious and lived it all as if it was a nightmare, though I still had the control over my body. He came close to my bed and grabbed my hand, squeezing it. I felt like I was floating in the air. Long golden threads came out of his fingers and he nailed them in my wrists, going through my skin until he reached my muscles and hung on to them. I could feel he was taking control over my body, as if I was a lifeless puppet. Truth is, I was letting him do it. I didn't feel any pain. Actually, what I felt was relief, as if I had got rid of a heavy load I had been carrying, my life. It was an amazing feeling. Nothing mattered anymore. Suddenly, he pulled my muscles and my nerves, and all my body shook, reacting with synchronized movements. He knew how to move me. Then he started humming a sad song that talked about himself. He introduced himself as the puppeteer, a lonely person who only had the company of his puppets, his only friends. I felt like he was my friend as well now, and he was there to free me of my suffering. I thanked him with a smile. He started to crush the bones in my body, breaking my limbs to be able to manipulate me easily. I could feel him twisting my ribs and my hips until I became what he wanted me to be. My torn muscles had been replaced by golden threads and my limbs were following a macabre dance. The last thing I felt was his warm hand around my neck, pulling slowly but firmly, and suddenly, a firm crack. The next morning, they found my dead body hanging from the ceiling in my room. Around me, no mess or anything weird. Only a china doll lying on the floor, her face all broken among her long blonde curls. Now we continue with another classic, Hope a Heart. Do you value your heart? Detective Jason McMahon's cell phone rang again at dawn. He didn't have to answer to know what it was about. A new murder, the fifth one. He picked up the phone. The coroner informed him that the lifeless body of a woman had been found in a lonely forest. The cause of death, a heart-breaking wound in the chest from which the heart had been removed. Again, the same modus operandi. Everything pointed to the same criminal. A case they had been working on for months and for which they had no clues. He got dressed and headed to the police station. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, a car pulled up onto the side of an old highway. It was a young couple who used the night to escape prying eyes. "You could at least put on some music," said the girl to her companion. "Come on, Valerie, don't be a party pooper. Let's enjoy this moment, just the two of us," he replied. "Of course, a very romantic moment while your girlfriend is quiet at home without suspecting that her beloved Tommy is cheating on her," she reproached him. "Oh, come on, I already told you she doesn't mean anything to me. Besides, she's also your friend, and I've never heard you complain about the other times that—" A loud bang over their heads interrupted him as if something had hit the ceiling. The young couple got scared when the car began to shake violently. Tommy grabbed Valerie's hand to reassure her, even though he didn't know what the hell was going on. The shaking continued for a few seconds that seemed endless until suddenly, everything stopped. "What was that?" He looked at her, turned on the lights, and gathering all the courage he could, grabbed the door handle and got out of the car. Everything was dark except for the area lit by the car. He looked at the ceiling and around him, but saw nothing strange. Only a black feather swaying in the wind before his eyes. But it was just that, a feather. He turned and got back into the vehicle. Valerie's face couldn't help but reflect the fear she felt. He was about to hug her when claws appeared before them, hitting the car's window and cracking it. An instant later, and with no time to react, the glass broke into 1,000 pieces. Two hands emerged from the wreckage, seizing the young man and pulling him with violence. The push was so strong that Tommy crashed to the ground several meters away. As he tried to sit up, he finally saw his attacker. He swallowed. He couldn't believe what was before his eyes. It looked like the figure of a tall, skinny boy with white hair and crystal blue eyes. Huge black wings hung from its back. But that was not what overwhelmed him the most, but to see that its body was a canvas with human bones painted on it as if it were fully tattooed. Valerie was screaming from inside the car, but Tommy was unable to move. Totally paralyzed, he watched as the stranger leaned into the vehicle and grabbed her by the arm, dragging her out and pulling her to its side. It brushed back a lock of hair and leaned over her. It moved closer to her ear to whisper something and kissed her on the forehead. Her last kiss. The creature raised its arm towards the sky and dropped it an instant later with violence. It was an accurate blow directly to the young woman's chest. She didn't even have time to scream. A murmur rose from her throat, drowned in blood, but she could no longer move. Tommy watched the scene dumbfounded, unable to believe it. He watched as the attacker pulled something from inside Valerie's chest. A lung. But that was not what it wanted. It continued to search inside her body, breaking bones and removing meat while she grew increasingly pale. At last, it seemed to find what it was looking for with so much desire: the heart. It grabbed it with his right hand and began to pull it away from her body. It looked down at its own chest, where it opened a wound and gradually introduced a new organ there. Then, it started rummaging through its pants pocket with its bloody hand until it got a needle out. The creature began to tug at Valerie's hair, plucking several strands, took the needle, threaded it with her hair, and started sewing the wounds on its own chest. Suddenly, something approached the car. It was a dog, somewhat neglected, who sat on the ground and looked at the boy. When the creature noticed its presence, it interrupted its macabre ritual. It got out of the car, knelt down, and patted the animal on the head. The dog turned around and continued its way. At last, the sinister figure turned his attention to Tommy, who was still paralyzed. It slowly approached him, and when it reached him, it bent down and brought his face close. Tommy saw the recent stitches made from his friend's hair, right where its heart was located. Valerie's heart. A tear slid down his cheek. The stranger watched him closely and cocked his head curiously. It reached out and wiped his wet eyes. Tommy, without hope of saving himself, stared at the attacker. He noticed how it placed its hands on both sides of his face, leaning over him and leaving very little space between their faces. Finally, in a sad tone, it eased Tommy's suffering by whispering, "Do you value your heart?" The evening continues with another creepypasta TikTakers. It's Nemesis' turn. Do you know her? I remember the morning when my mother told me she was dying. Her health had always been fragile, but we never expected her to be struck with a terminal disease. In her latest checkup, the doctor was extremely blunt with us. She had about a year left to live, if she was lucky. The first months were a complete nightmare. Something like this would be harsh for anyone, but for someone as shy and without friends as me, it was even worse. I didn't even have my father's support. He abandoned us so long ago, I didn't even remember what he looked like anymore. And school was yet another torture, since everyone ostracized me there. There was someone in particular who absolutely loathed me, Connor. He would insult me, make fun of me, and would sometimes hit me. And that day wouldn't be the exception. After class, he felt like pushing me to the ground. I stayed on the floor with my knees aching, seeing how he walked away laughing. Once I recovered, I stood up and headed back home. I knew that would never change unless I fought back. But I didn't have the strength nor the confidence, and at the end of the day, I was dealing with much worse. My mother, how would the last day I spent with her be like? Or most importantly, when? Maybe it would be better if I disappeared along with her. That day, I went for a walk in the forest since I needed some alone time. I had been walking for a while when I bumped into a huge tree, a sequoia. It was so big, I could hardly see its top. I took advantage of its shadow to sit for a while with my back resting on its trunk, and without realizing it, I fell asleep. I woke up dazed and knew it was pretty late because it was starting to get dark. A spider climbing on my arm caught my attention. My first urge was to squash it, but I decided to just knock her off me and let it be. I stood up and I soon felt a presence in front of me. It was a girl. She was tall, had very long chestnut hair, and what really stood out about her was a slightly cracked white mask she was using. I could see her eyes, one black as coal and the other red as blood. She was wearing a short shirt from which multiple wounds peeked out. On her hand, she had a small circular object. I don't know what it was. I did notice a symbol on it though, a pentagram surrounded by a circle. She caught me by surprise, but for some reason, she didn't scare me. There was something about her presence that inspired peace and security, at least to me. "My name is Nemesis," she said in a grave voice. And that's how our friendship started. Every day, we would meet in the forest and would talk for hours. I told her about my problems, my mom's situation, Connor's bullying. But now, I had a friend by my side, and that gave me the strength to keep going. However, one day, everything went wrong. After school, I went directly to the forest like I always do, but I felt different. It didn't take long for me to realize that someone was following me, and very scared, I ran to my safe place under the sequoia. But when I arrived, Nemesis wasn't there. I felt a knot in my throat, fearing that nobody would help me. When I turned around, I saw Connor. He had a small knife in his hand, and thus I knew he wasn't messing around. I stepped back, but felt completely paralyzed by fear, so I couldn't run away. Connor stepped closer to me and then plunged towards me. I was immobilized under his weight, and even though I tried to break free, I knew how that would end up. But suddenly, I started to hear a children's song in my ears. Connor was surprised. He was hearing it too. I then saw a spider with long legs walk by my side, and shortly after, Nemesis appeared. She exuded a dark and threatening aura, almost as if she was an evil spirit. Connor was too dumbfounded to realize how Nemesis threw some sort of metallic threads at him. With those, Nemesis cut Connor top to bottom, and he let out a grunt of pain at the same time his blood slipped down his body. Nemesis continued tearing out Connor's skin with her weapon, that small circular object where knives were peeking out. And soon enough, there was nothing else to tear out. Connor collapsed on top of me with his entire weight, drenching me in his blood. I saw Nemesis get closer, no longer exuding the dark aura from before. She pushed aside Connor's lifeless body and extended her hand to me. She then told me something I wouldn't understand until much later. Come with me. I want to introduce you to the tall man. He will give you power and nobody will hurt you ever again. There is a fight coming and a Slander man wants you by his side. I had no idea what she was talking about, but what other choice did I have? Soon, I would end up alone in the world, and she was the only friend I had. I grabbed her hand and stood up. I saw how the spider went up Nemesis' chest and then rested on her shoulder. Without letting go of her hand, I accepted, and from that point on, I spent the rest of my life going through the path of darkness. However, that is a story I'll share with you some other time, if you dare to hear it, that is. Can you imagine waking up very scared, confused, without remembering anything that has happened? If that happens to you, you may have become a creepypasta. It was a very dark night. Its color is different to the usual ones, since the moon was shining with a red blood color. Looking at that night sky was a true spectacle, but my mind was somewhere else. Those trees were so tall and had so many thin branches that they looked like shadows. And those shadows were coming after me. Or at least, that's how it felt. I was very scared and completely confused because I couldn't remember anything of what happened. I had no idea how I had got to that forest, nor why did I emerge from the depths of that cold river. I walked aimlessly for a long time and I felt my body was getting way too light, as if it was completely empty. I went across the lakes and pastures of that region, which I found pretty easy to do, as if I had been doing it all my life. And it was precisely in those waters where, unintentionally, I saw my reflection. It took me a while to process what I was seeing, since my reflection showed a completely different version of me. That person wasn't familiar to me. Now, I had very long black hair, but what really stood out was how I no longer had any facial features. My face was completely blank. After witnessing that, absolute horror took over me. Although, only for a moment. As incredible as it may seem, I soon got used to my new reality. I was no longer afraid to touch my new face with no signs of eyes, nose, or mouth. I soon realized that despite that, I could still see and breathe with no issues. How could that be? I also noticed my new attire. They were clothes I would normally never wear, and I don't remember ever owning them. I also couldn't remember what I was wearing when I arrived at that place, but I was sure I wouldn't put on such a tight black suit. Something else that caught my attention was how I had not eaten anything in a very long time, but I felt no hunger regardless. As I got more and more used to my new reality, I felt more comfortable in that forest. I've always been scared of dark places with no people, but for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. A feeling of safety and love inundated my surroundings as I observed every leaf that fell to the ground. Those trees, scary to me at first, became my friends and protectors who would always offer me a place to hide. And then, out of a sudden, I experienced a new feeling. I needed to find a person, although I didn't completely understand why. I headed to the roadside and I hid behind the bushes to wait for a car to appear. It didn't take long for the first vehicle to show up. A blue car was coming closer in the distance and I could distinguish its front lights perfectly. I waited patiently, and once it got close enough, I jumped to the road, placing myself right in front of that coming vehicle. The blue car, trying to evade me, ended up flying off and doing turns in the air until landing in the depths of the forest. When I saw it, I rushed towards it, pushed by a devouring instinct that also seemed strange and unfamiliar to me. When they saw me, the people from the vehicle tried to flee in horror. They were on the floor, injured and crawling in desperation, but I wouldn't allow them to escape. Long tentacles emerged from my back, which little by little ended up destroying each and every one of them. I heard them crying and screaming in pain as I crushed them with my strength. This sensation was incredible. I was enjoying myself like never before in my life. Soon after, I realized that an unconscious girl was still in the car. With the screams of her companions, she started to wake up, looking completely confused. They were her family, and the first thing she did was scream, asking for their whereabouts. I carefully got closer, and she looked at me directly. And although she was surprised at first, she then seemed to no longer care. And as if nothing happened, she asked my name. "My name is Slander Woman," I told her. That was the first time I pronounced out loud and heard my new voice. That girl with her sweet face responded, "My name is Alondra, although I like to be called Aloe. Pleased to meet you, friend." I was paralyzed. She didn't see me as a monster, but as a normal woman. I grabbed her hand, and as we vanished in the night's fog, we talked about many things. Her kindness saved her, for now. And we've reached the end of this evening of Creepypastas. Of course, they're not all here. We've chosen a few so you can have a terrifying Halloween night. We leave you with the last video of this special. And if you're still craving more, you can always keep watching more videos on our channel. Happy Halloween, TikTakers. It's the horrifying story of a female spirit who dwells in the last toilet of the women's restroom. If you bump into her, you need to be careful with the toilet paper you choose, because that could be the very last thing you do. Her name means red cloak in Japanese, and its origin is difficult to pinpoint. The first images of this character appeared at the beginning of the 20th century in the middle of the Showa era, Japan's era of enlightenment. Around 1935, they said that a very handsome young man wandering around covered in a red cloak used to hide in the lockers of Osaka's elementary schools. Later on in 1940, the legend transformed the man into a vampire who terrified the neighbors at a neighborhood in Tokyo. Over the years, it became vague if the figure was a man or a woman, until the 80s, when the legend started getting popular again among young people and was then given the figure of a woman. The legend then became that Akando was a student when she was alive, subject to constant humiliation by her classmates. And once dead, her goal became getting revenge on the rest of the world for the humiliation she had to endure in her school's restroom. However, why did this legend become popular among Japanese students? Well, because of the bloody game that Akando subjects her victims to. This spirit will always look for the person at the last toilet of the line, and the legend says that once you're finished doing your business, a sinister voice will ask you, red or blue paper? After asking this, 2 rolls of toilet paper of those colors will appear. And we're sorry, but there is no right answer. Choosing any of them will lead to a horrible and painful death. If you choose the red one, Akando will appear and will tear out your neck skin. She will do it little by little so you can feel the pain while you bleed to death. That's why the roll is red. And if you choose the blue roll instead, she will grab your neck too, but will strangulate you slowly until your face becomes blue. Other versions of the legend say that if you choose blue, Akando will cut off your legs and you will slowly bleed to death. In any case, your suffering is assured. If for any reason you decide to say a different color, a hole beneath you will open towards some kind of underworld where white hands will grab and drag you into the absolute darkness. And if you can't speak or decide not to respond, time will stop around you, and you will be eternally trapped in the restroom. Trying to escape or running away will not work either. If you try, Akando will materialize before you, blocking the exit and also ending your life. Trying to avoid her will be futile since they say that when she appears, the restroom becomes completely blocked in an alternate dimension from which it's impossible to get out. It seems useless trying to escape such a horrible apparition. Akando has a clear objective of ending the lives of his victims and will stop at nothing to achieve her ends. That said, a few sources say that it is possible to save yourself. For instance, some say that if you calmly respond by saying that you don't need any paper, then there will be a small possibility that Akando will spare your life, depending on the mood she's in at the moment. Others also claim that if you answer that you want yellow paper, the spirit will spare your life, but will then shove your head into the toilet as revenge. That is a less painful destiny, but a pretty nasty one nonetheless. In any case, TikTakers, remember that if you ever go into a public restroom in Japan, it's best to never use the last toilet of the line. Who knows what might be waiting for you in there? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode!